Welcome to Maximum Impact, Episode 9, with Daniel Burrus, Keynote speaker, business strategist, global futurist, and New York Times and the Wall Street Journal best-selling author. We discuss how to see the invisible and do the impossible. If you're new here, welcome. My name's Alan Isfan, and I'm a tech entrepreneur with a fascination for disruption. I created this podcast to bring together the brightest minds in the areas of personal development, exponential technology, and business to help entrepreneurs train their minds, launch and grow disruptive businesses that make our world a better place. Today's guest is Daniel Burrus. Now, I came across Daniel on LinkedIn, Pulse actually. He writes some really popular articles and just some of the best stuff that I've seen on everything from today's technology to the future. In fact, he's got nearly 800,000 followers on Pulse, so it's pretty amazing. I also just recently read his New York Times and the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Flash Foresight, and I gotta say, I was just completely blown away. You know, I often talk of testing assumptions with fake products and ads, before jumping in and investing time and money into a product, just to make sure that there's actually a market there. But Daniel dials things back way before even that stage. He's got now the way to analyze trends. He categorizes the trends as hard trends and soft trends. We talked quite a bit about that during the podcast. And he's really developed a scientific and systematic approach to problem solving and building companies. We had a great chat, and at times I may have sounded like I was pitching his stuff. Just to be very clear, I was not paid to do this podcast or any other podcast. I just think he's come up with some amazing framework and ideas and strategy that is in sharp contrast with these throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks guesswork. That's not to say that testing and failure isn't part of the process, but I'm convinced that Daniel's approach will increase probability of success by at least 10 times. I'm actually starting to use a lot of his techniques already. So I'm really excited about that. Just one last thing, that there was a bit of a delay in the line, and there were a few occasions where I thought he's kind of done with the thought. I jumped in, and unfortunately I interrupted Daniel a couple of times, so it wasn't intentional. In any case, I hope you really enjoy our conversation. It was a really exciting one for me, and I hope to get him back on the podcast in the future. All right, let's go. Welcome, Daniel, to Maximum Impact. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and share some lessons with my listeners. I just got finished reading your pretty amazing book, and I really wanted to talk about Flash Foresight quite a bit and some of the projects you're involved with, and really help people get a sense for where things are going 3 to 5 years and make some real business decisions.
Great. Well, I know that you mentioned that you are already using principles within the book that you've learned, and they've been helpful for you. So that's great.
Well, they sure have. And, I can remember back when, my career was more or less set in terms of what I got excited about as youth, taking, TVs apart and stereos and speakers and all those kinds of things. Before we get into the book and the principles, I love to get a sense for people and kind of where they came from. And if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about kind of where that spark happened for you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have, first of all, I've started 6 companies over the years. 4 of them were national leaders in the United States in the first year. One of them was in the aviation business. I had my own airplane design. Actually, I was a test pilot for my own design. I also was the first guy to develop mobile apps for the military. I was the first guy to develop mobile real estate apps, which I have since licensed that software to Zillow and companies like that. So yeah, in other words, I don't just write about these things, I actually do them. 5 of the 6 companies were profitable in the first year. That the last one took 2 years, but not a lot of people could say that. And before that, I taught biology and physics. So I actually started out as a science instructor and really a researcher. I was actually the first undergraduate to direct a federal research grant in the U.S. and I only share that, which is very ancient history, only to let our listeners know that everything that I've developed is research and science-based. So was about 35 years ago when I started Burrus Research, which is my core company, and I developed my forecasting principles. I used a scientific approach to doing that, and I think that's why literally the thousands of predictions have all done very well and held up, as well as I've written 6 books that have done extremely well. The one that you mentioned, Flash Foresight, my last one, that one has been a New York Times, Wall Street Journal bestseller. Actually was #1 in every category on Amazon, including, fiction, for almost a month, which is pretty unheard of. So, and it's a required read by the IBMs and the Deloittes. So I think your readers or your listeners would really find a lot of value in that book. So really, I'm a science guy. I'm an innovator. I'm a technology forecaster, and the methodologies that I've developed have helped have really changed how companies like the Deloittes and the IBMs and the Googles innovate and plan. So let's see if we can help our listeners do that right now.
Perfect. Well, let's jump into one of I wouldn't say necessarily the core, but the thing that I thought was really eye-opening in terms of looking at trends, or the hard trends versus soft trends thing. I don't think I'd ever heard anybody talking about it that way. Can you dig into that a little bit and help us understand that?
Yeah, it's a concept I pioneered many decades ago, and it's really, really been a core concept. And it is, think of it as a way to manage risk that is very transformative. Because as an innovator, as an entrepreneur, or if you're an established company and you want to do something new, at some point it's about, well, what's the risk versus the reward, and how far are we sticking our neck out? So just to give a little bit of background, there are 2 types of trends. This is based on, again, 35 years of research, and that is, I call them hard trends and soft trends. Hard trends will happen, guaranteed. You can't stop them. If you're a country even as big as the United States, too bad, you can't stop it. If you're Google with seemingly all the money that you could possibly have, or Apple, you know what? You can't stop it. These are the hard trends. Think of them as future facts. And anything time that you know something's going to happen before it happens, you definitely have an advantage. Secondly, there is certainty around hard trends. And we live in a very uncertain world. For example, before we started recording, I mentioned to you I was in Nice, France, just a couple days ago, speaking at a global cybersecurity conference. And again, we've got in Europe, what's going to happen with Greece and their economy? What's going to happen with Brazil and their economy? And what's going to happen with stocks that you have in your portfolio, or your investments that you have? We have all of this uncertainty. So here's an insight. Strategy based on uncertainty has high risk. On the other hand, strategy based on certainty has low risk and high reward. So in a world that seems to be so completely filled with uncertainty, one of the things that you read, in Flash Foresight, was you want to start with certainty. So the hard trends provide that. Now, that's an alternative is, of course, the soft trends. And soft trends it doesn't mean that they aren't going to happen. What it does mean is they are based on an assumption, not a future fact. So a soft trend you might think I don't like. But in reality, I like both hard trends and soft trends because they both have value. I can't change a hard trend, but I want to know it's coming. Every disruption.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Did decades ago, did someone say, hey, let's not tell Kodak about digital photography. Let's keep that a secret. And of course, no, digital photography was there. Unfortunately, they saw it as a soft trend. Oops, that was a hard trend. Putting hardware as well as software into the cloud. is that a passing fad? Because we've seen a lot of technology fads, a lot of things come and go. Or is that something that is a hard trend that will continue to grow at an exponential rate? And of course, the answer is that's a hard trend. After 3G and 4G, is that it? And the answer is no. Matter of fact, the future fact is we're going to have 5G followed by 6G. As a matter of fact, we can even tell exactly how much more powerful 5G will be to 6G and 7G. I've been tracking them ever since there was 1G. And storage. As a matter of fact, let's talk about the iPhone 8. And you would say, whoa, we don't even have the iPhone 7 yet. How could nobody knows about the iPhone 8? No Apple guys left that in the bar. How would we know? And the truth of the matter is, you know quite a bit about the iPhone 8 if you really just think about it. For example, will the iPhone 8 have a faster processing chip in it than the iPhone 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1? And you already know the answer is, well, of course it will. Of course it will. And by the way, is that an assumption or a future fact? And the reality is, hey, that's a future fact. Will they be able to get more information stored internally in that device? Or is it just full, you can't get any more in there? And the answer is, well, of course you can get more in there. Just like you can get 4G and 5G. Just like the cloud is not getting full. We've got plenty of room in the cloud. Will we be, now let's take something a little bit more, we're doing kind of baby steps right now, but let's, to help separate the hard trend from the soft trend, let me put it this way. Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the first cyber currency that came out. And when Bitcoin first came out, a lot of people thought that it had a very bright future. As a matter of fact, even today, a lot of people think, well, Bitcoin's going to have a very bright future. Is the future success of Bitcoin a hard trend, a future fact, or is it a soft trend? Well, already you're starting to understand and learn that would be a soft trend. What is the hard trend? And the hard trend is cyber currency. The minute Bitcoin came out, I said, well, the future success of Bitcoin is unknown. However, what is known is we'll have more cyber currencies. And as a matter of fact, right now, there's 179 different cyber currencies right now. So so you see how you separate the hard from the soft. For example, will Google continue to be the leader in search, hard trend or soft? And the answer is soft. Matter of fact, at one time, Yahoo was the leader in search. So it depends on what Google does. They may lose their edge. That is soft.
Just to pull on that one for a second, because a lot of people kind of go, well, how is that possible? Well, Facebook is starting to dominate, the internet. I mean, a lot of people's first step to get on the internet in the morning is to Facebook, and Facebook has its own search. Mobile, a lot of people that are on iOS are using the native search, and that's not Google either. So it wouldn't take much to make what looks like absolute dominance into something that is not that.
No, as a matter of fact, if you go back, because I get about a little over 100 articles a year published. I've been doing that for over 30 years. So if you look back to what I was writing in 2004 and 5 about Google, I was saying Google's biggest problem is that we're not going to be using our desktop computers to find things. And if they don't get mobile, they're going to be in trouble. Well, here we are. See, that was a hard trend. It was easy to predict that and be right. And as a matter of fact, let's just take another example of a hard trend that most people aren't even thinking about yet. But if you think about these things, it's amazing how much you can see. There was something called BYOD, Bring Your Own Device. And that was something that threw all of the corporate IT departments for a loop, because people were bringing in their own smartphones now, because before the iPhone, everybody had a BlackBerry that was issued by the company, and it was under their firewall. But when the iPhone came out and we started getting more and more devices and then tablets and so on, people were bringing their own devices, and that was making the IT department go crazy. So many IT departments started realizing, wait, you got to think opposite, which is another principle I teach in Flash Foresight. And that is, instead of seeing it as a problem, let's look for the opportunity. And they realized that employees bringing their own devices would be a way to actually lower their costs. They don't have to provide the device. They needed to really give guidance on what kind of device to buy. What's the best one to buy, and how do we make it secure through VPNs and so on. So what's the predictable future? The part that they aren't seeing right now, and that is WYOD, which is wear your own device. And that's just begun. We're talking way beyond Fitbits and way beyond the Apple Watches now, where you can have intelligence sewn into clothing. You can have a camera on that people can't even see. Google Glass was obvious, but the new Google Glass will be very invisible. And by the way, we'll have augmented reality built into it. So wear your own device is not a soft trend, unknown. It is in reality, a hard trend will happen. So if I want to be what I call anticipatory as an IT department, I would be asking myself, how can we turn that hard trend that will happen into an opportunity right away, instead of waiting until it's a crisis and then put out fires and crisis manage?
Very, very interesting. And this distinction is pretty huge. I wonder if, because the example that you just brought is actually a great one around the wear your own device, because it's not something that's happening a whole lot. So you kind of figure that it's soft, but it's not about how early it is. It's about how predictable it is, that it's absolutely going to happen. It's just a question of getting the timing right. Do I have it right?
Yes, exactly. And then there also is a way to get the timing right. So let's come back on the timing. Let's remember that one, okay? But because I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Let's just talk about some categories of hard trends. And but before leaving soft trends, let me just say that here, once again, I like soft trends. Why? Because I can change them. And soft trends, as I mentioned, are based on assumptions, not future facts. But here's an insight that I'll share with all of our listeners, and that is there's actually two types of assumptions. To make it easy for you to remember, let's call them hard assumptions and soft assumptions. A hard assumption is based on research. You've got statistics to back up your assumption. A soft assumption, on the other hand, is one where it makes sense to you, but you didn't research it. For example, I know you're up in Canada. In the United States, when the Affordable Care Act was put into place, what they call Obamacare, and they started signing people up on the website, they had a soft assumption that enough young people would sign up for it to offset all the more expensive older people. Turns out they never researched that. That was a soft assumption. Oops, and they were wrong. So it's given them quite a bit of problems because now the money is not working out. So one of the things you would do if you're a business is look at all of the assumptions that your strategies are based on and ask yourself which ones are hard and which ones are soft, because the soft assumptions have high risk. So a little bit of information on those soft trends. Now as we turn to hard trends, there's three main categories that I'll share with people. One is demographics. And for example, in the United States, there's 78 million baby boomers, and the hard trend is they're getting older. They're not going to get younger. They're going to continue to get older. And we know a lot of future facts about that as they get older. Very quickly, and by the way, Canada has a lot of elders as well. As a matter of fact, in Europe, it's a very aging population. As a matter of fact, China is an aging population, which has huge ramifications. So not every country is older. Istanbul average age is 28, so that's very different. But we do have a lot of nations that have been the main economy engines of the planet for many decades and decades and decades, have aging populations with ramifications. So you want to look for opportunities. So we mentioned smart watches. let me talk about an opportunity. Could I create right now a smartwatch using hard trends to have low risk and high opportunity? We're now talking about being an entrepreneur right now, to create something that doesn't exist right now, to show you how easy it is. Okay, and the answer is sure, definitely you could. For example, I would create using demographics, knowing there's 78 million baby boomers getting older, knowing that the fastest growing age group in the United States is 100 years old and older. What I would do is I would develop a smartwatch designed for 80-year-olds and older. And you would say, I don't think they're going to buy them. And the answer is they're not. You're not going to buy them. You're going to buy them for them. And why would you want to get one of those watches for those older people? And the answer is, well, for example, your smartphone, and if you have a smartwatch, you actually got a little thing in it called an accelerometer. It can tell movement. That's how when you move your iPhone or your Android, you change its position, the picture will switch from a up and down view to a side to side view. That's the accelerometer. Or if you move it, you can tell if it's a compass, whether you're pointing north, south, east, or west. That's the accelerometer. So in this case, if 95-year-old grandma is wearing her watch, her smartwatch, and all of a sudden it rapidly moves 4 feet, what happened to grandma? Well, she probably fell. Now, does she need the watch to say in a little electronic voice, hey, grandma, you just fell? No, she's on the floor. She knew she fell. Who needs to know that she fell? And the answer is you do if it's your grandma. And a lot of people don't realize on the Apple Watch there's a sensor that they have not told you about. So I'm now going to give you some news. And that is, one of the sensors they haven't told you about is a blood oxygen level reader. By the way, the reason Apple hasn't told you about the blood oxygen level reader is it's in the process of getting FDA approval to become a legal medical device, which is newsworthy. So Apple doesn't want to spill the beans until that is passed, and then they can claim the watch is a true medical device. So now you've just got a little tip. Anyway, blood oxygen level. So if 95-year-old grandma, would it be good to know her blood oxygen level at any point in time so that if it gets real low, you would get alerted? And instead of having to wait for an ambulance to pick her up, you could get her into the hospital before she has that stroke or that problem and get her dealt with and taken care of. And, of course, the answer is, well, grandma would rather not have the stroke. She'd rather get in and get help. So what else? Well, let's say that grandpa's got a little dementia, and he's out taking a walk and can't remember all of a sudden how to get home. What does he do? Well, he asks his watch, and his watch tells him how to get home. By the way, where is Grandpa? Well, I got to look at my phone, and I can see exactly where he is. There's a little beep right on the map. So you start to get the idea. You could actually create countless, endless numbers of fantastic products and services that have low risk and high reward by using hard trends methodologies like the one I'm describing. So,
and then you can certainly, you can layer on top of that, the other things from a technology point of view. You know that they're going to get cheaper, the batteries are going to get better, the wireless connection is going to get faster. You can layer on top artificial intelligence so that you can track the patterns and see when a pattern is different from usual, all sorts of things.
All sorts of things. Absolutely right. And then, so, you got the demographics. Then, of course, you've got government regulations. And government regulations, every country has those. And are we going to get more of them? The answer is, well, yes. And when we get a new government regulation, whether it's here or Canada or anywhere else, people don't like them. And we create big lists of things we don't like. So one of the principles that I teach in Flash Foresight is opposites work better. So instead of creating the list of things you don't like, which will be endless, start with what you do like. And what you'll find is there's opportunity and money. That's why most people never tap into it. For example, I'm in California right now. I'm in San Diego. And in California in January, there were a little over 900 new laws that went into place. How many of them were a surprise? Yeah, how many were a surprise? The answer is none of them were a surprise. They were all known way ahead of time. And one of those laws said that within 2 years, every kindergarten and first grade in the state of California, within 2 years, 50% of their reading has to be nonfiction. By the way, right now, 100% of their reading is fiction. The Little Engine That Could is fiction. So they got 2 years, and half of it has to be nonfiction. Now, if you heard that law, what would you say? Well, you would start saying, well, the guys are idiots. What are they doing? Shouldn't they be spending on law enforcement? I mean, why are they bothering with that? And you'd come up with this big list of stuff that would make you all unhappy, and you wouldn't get anywhere. But I talked to a 28-year-old teacher who did the opposite. Instead of looking at what was bad about it, she made 3 phone calls. She called the San Diego School District, she called the Los Angeles School District, and she called the San Francisco School District. By the way, she chose wisely. They're very big. And she said, hey, you got 2 years to have half of your books for the kindergartners and first graders to be nonfiction. If I provided those books, would you be interested? And they said, yes, we didn't know how we were going to do it. They basically underwrote her company. She didn't have to go on Shark Tank to raise money. My point
That's
here,
amazing.
My point is, hey, there's opportunity in those regulations. Stop looking for what you don't like. Start looking for what you do like. Opposites work better. A third category of hard trends that I'll share with our listeners is technology. And of course, technology lets you do things that were before impossible. And we have one of the things that I have in the book is I talk about the 8 hard trend innovation accelerators. And they actually, I first defined those back in the 80s. One of them is virtualization. So we can not only virtualize software as a service, like Salesforce.com, but today you can virtualize hardware because I can start 100 servers today and not have to own any of them through Amazon or through Microsoft or some other company like that has a cloud service. So today you could make anything a service. Let's talk about a service that doesn't exist today that we could create right now, being entrepreneurs. Could we create a company that would be IaaS, innovation as a service? So we provide innovation for companies that need innovation. And the answer is, sure, you could do that. Now, that doesn't exist right now. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think that will exist, or do you think that's not going to happen? And the answer is, you already know. Well, that's going to happen because of a principle I'll share with you right now. And that is, if it can be done, it will be done. If you don't do it, someone else will. So when you start looking at all the hard trends, and I only mentioned one, virtualization, I could have mentioned dematerialization, making things smaller. Could have mentioned convergence, and not just the convergence of features and functions, but also the convergence of industries that you can predict ahead of time using hard trends.
So computers and cars, for example. Computers and cars,
absolutely.
And Tesla is a good example. Yeah.
Yeah, or another example would be the telecommunications industry converging with the information industry, converging with the entertainment industry, converging with the publishing industry. They all used to be separate industries with separate vendors, separate customers, separate conferences. Now they're all just becoming one. So if you use hard trends, you can even ask yourself, what are the industries that have not converged yet that will converge? For example, what industries will converge with agriculture that haven't? What industries will converge with healthcare that haven't yet? And all of a sudden you can start to see new customers, new opportunities. So again, this is a very powerful way to go. So let's back up for just a second. And let's just think about, what is it that I'm doing with Flash Foresight? And what is it that I do with my company? And of course, if anyone wants more information on any of this, I obviously think you should get Flash Foresight, the book, but you could also go to my website, Burrus, BURRUS.com, and you can get a lot of really good resources. So what am I trying to do here? What I'm trying to do is to teach people what I consider to be the big missing competency. Let's talk about the competencies that most companies have. Many of them are lean. In other words, they've worked at taking the costs out of things and reducing the costs. And there's a lot of lean initiatives out there. And by the way, that's good. Glad you're being lean. Should continue to do that. The big antidote that companies have to the rapid pace of technological change is agility. So they want to create agile companies, agile innovation. As a matter of fact, entrepreneurs are looking at agility and how can we use agility. But you have to remember that agility is related to reacting and responding. And reacting and responding is really crisis management. It's putting out fires. It's dealing with change from the outside in, rather than change from the inside out, which is something different. So the question I would put to people is, did Uber come up with the idea for Uber using being lean? Well, no, it wouldn't help. Did they use agility? Or did that help them come up with the idea for Uber? Or did Airbnb come up with the concept of Airbnb because they were agile? The answer is no, agility wouldn't help them at all. Now, the missing competence.
They were desperate. They were desperate, but that's a different story.
the
missing
competence. Yeah, exactly. The missing competency is being able to anticipate. And what can you anticipate? Well, you can anticipate disruptions before they disrupt. Every disruption that's ever happened was there to see. If you read, for example, my 1993 book, Technotrends, there's a section, remember that's 1993. You can see in there a piece I called Blockbuster is Busted. And if you read what's after that, you'll see me describing what became known as Netflix. You'll see me talking about virtual bookstores in there. I didn't know they would call it Amazon, but I knew they would have it and put an accurate time frame on it. And talked about our smartphones that we have today. That was back in 93, putting accurate time frames on it. So what I'm getting at is I'm not the only guy that can do this. You can learn to do this too when you get the competencies. And I did say that there was another thing I would explain to everyone listening, and I don't want that to pass by us, and that is time frames. So when will things happen? How can you get an accurate time frame? Maybe you can see a hard trend coming, but when will it happen? And this is what I call the 3 digital accelerators. I first came up with the list of 3 digital accelerators way back in 1983, over 30 years ago. And I've been tracking them ever since. They provided extremely accurate time frames for the when all these things will happen. So what are the 3 digital accelerators? The first one is computing power and the exponential increases in computing power. Now, I first discovered Moore's Law back in 1983. I can tell you not a lot of people were looking at Moore's Law in 83. And because I was a science researcher guy, I saw, wow, I think he nailed it. Because it said that processing power doubles every 18 months as the price drops in half. Well, imagine me back in 83 looking at the year 2000, way out into 2000. Well, if I know that the price is dropping in half every year and the processing power is doubling every 18 months, I would know exactly, way back in 83, how expensive a computer would be in 2000 and how powerful it would be. Well, if I know how expensive it is and how powerful it is, I'll be able to predict the future with amazing accuracy, which, by the way, I did. But I needed more than Moore's Law, so I came up with 2 other laws. I call them the law of bandwidth and the law of storage, because you need more than processing power. You need more than computing power. So when you put, for example, you might remember the 512K modem. Well, try one of those today, but plan on waiting a while. And, of course, storage. I just bought a 128 gigabyte stick drive, for 20-something bucks on Amazon. That was impossible just a couple of years ago, but it isn't now because we're in an exponential curve. And that exponential change curve I first defined back in 83 has held up, meaning it doubling. So when something doubles, 2 becomes 4 becomes 8. In the beginning, it's quite slow. But now we're in this super fast phase. So we're no longer in a period of change. What it really means is we've just entered a period of true transformation. And transformation and change are 2 very different things. For example, to go from a 33 1/3 record one album per spinning disc called a record. To go from that to a CD, which was smaller, that was a change. One album per smaller spinning disc. But to go from a CD to having all of your music in your smartphone, that was a transformation. And that is really what I'm talking about. So I'm going to give you a prediction right now based on the hard trends that are already in place that I want all of the listeners to really think about because it's very powerful. And that is over the next 5 short years, every business process, how we sell, how we market, how we communicate, how we collaborate, how we innovate, how we train, how we educate, how we pay for things, how we secure things, all of that is going to be not changed. It will be transformed in a short 5-year period. By the way, it's happening already. Now, that's the hard trend. Here is the soft trend, and that is, will you transform your business processes in your company? Well, I don't know. That's soft. But one of the nice things about soft trends are you can change them. So if it looked like you weren't going to transform something, hey, you know what? You can change your mind on that. Maybe you should be transforming it and not just changing it. One other little insight I'll share with everyone, and that is that if you're changing things right now, you're falling behind every year. In other words, the key insight here is you need to be transforming them. And you better make sure you're not just changing them. You really are indeed transforming them.
So there's a saying that I like to share with the only constant is change. Obviously, I didn't come up with that, but I think you've gone beyond that statement now.
Exactly,
the only constant is transformation.
Exactly, because we've shifted now. And it's kind of like there's an old saying, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always had. And I would say that's now obsolete. I would now say, if you do what you've always done, you'll get much less of what you've always had.
Very interesting. Now, when we look at the 3 digital accelerators, obviously there are things that we're already seeing today that are built on that. Artificial intelligence, for example, is based on the processing power and storage, and the Moore's law around those things. But what I think I'm finding people have a hard time with when I try to explain it is the exponential nature of the transformations. Not just the fact that things are accelerating, but that technologies that may appear not to be mainstream yet, say 3D printing, stay sort of under the radar for a little while, and it's those geeks that kind of find out about it, and we get the 3D printer, and then boom, all of a sudden it just hits that exponential curve and surfaces, if you will, and it just becomes everywhere. And I'd be curious to know which of these technologies you think are at that are just about to pop.
Well, there are a large number, and let's take 3D printing, which is actually what's called additive manufacturing. And I've got a newsletter. I call it's the Technotrends newsletter. I've been publishing it for over 30 years. We've been covering 3D printing for over 10 years. So it's not something that was just invented. It's been around for over 10 years. But we have, because of the exponential nature of those 3 change accelerators I talked about, we're now able to do things so much faster because an exponential curve is going almost vertical right now. So you have to ask yourself, what are really the exponential technologies? And if you really think about it, they are the ones that are the enablers. They are like a platform that you can use to enable new and amazing things. So an example of an enabling technology that's exponential would be cloud computing. Now, back in 1983, I came up with a list of 20 technologies that would shape the future, and believe it or not, cloud was there, digital was there. By the way, genetics was there, genetic engineering was there, and so was the artificial intelligence and so on. So, they were all there. But because the exponential curve is very slow in the beginning, throughout the 80s and 90s, it was not progressing that fast. But again, exponential has a super arc that starts, think of it as a hockey stick. and it's slow in the beginning, but all of a sudden about where your hand is, the hockey stick's going up pretty fast. Right now, that curve is about where your hand is on the stick. It's going up very fast. So so cloud is an enabling exponential technology. By the way, analytics, high-speed analytics is exponential, and one of those. Another one would be mobility. That's been around for a long time. I mean, let's face it, we had laptops in the 90s, but now we're in a different phase with that. 3D printing, you already mentioned that, additive manufacturing. These are just a few of what you would call the exponentials that are providing virtualization being another one. And data visualization is another one. Augmented reality, another one. So there are actually a number of those. So again, if people are interested in following that, you could go to burrus.com, burrus.com. I write a blog. I've got a couple of million monthly blog readers. I think the reason it's one of the biggest actually. I think that's because there's a lot of good stuff there. You met me on LinkedIn. I think I've got 770,000 connections on LinkedIn. I mean, one of the top 30 in the world. Well, as you know, I write a couple of blogs a week on LinkedIn. So there are ways of connecting with me to get ongoing information on this so that you can continue your learning beyond the podcast. And one of the thing I'll mention is the subtitle of the book. Flash Foresight is the title, but I chose the subtitle with great intent, and that is How to See the Invisible and Do the Impossible. So let's just think about that for a second. We're doing a podcast right now. We're recording. You're in Canada. I'm in San Diego. Well, that was impossible at one point in human history, but it isn't now. In other words, classes, that was impossible. Flying in a jet, that was impossible. So almost everything that we do on a daily basis at one point in human history was impossible. So how do you solve impossible problems? How do you do impossible things? And the answer is when a solution to an impossible problem becomes visible. When a new opportunity becomes visible, in that moment, you get a flash of foresight that allows you to move forward in a way that you couldn't have before. So in my book, Flash Foresight, what I did is I shared what I called 7 triggers, these things that make the invisible visible and allow you to move forward in a way that was impossible just before. And we've talked about the hard trends and soft trends. We've talked a little bit about opposites. We've talked about transformation. We've talked about the digital accelerators. So, those are all tools that you can use to all of a sudden start seeing the future in a way that you never could have before.
And that's the key piece that, the key theme that I got out of all of that is that, it may seem invisible and it's invisible to everybody else, but once you know how to look, it becomes clear.
Right.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and exactly. It is very powerful. And frankly, this methodology has changed how leading companies all around the world do their planning and their innovating. So whether you are a startup, someone who's just thinking of a new idea, someone who has already started a startup, someone that has, got a small business going or even a mid-sized business, I think you'd find it of great use. The companies, all the companies that I started, I didn't use backing or capital. Matter of fact, I had no business loans and no partners for any of them. And like I said, 4 of them were national leaders in the first year. My aviation company had 37 national locations in the first year. So one of the principles that I use, I teach in Flash Foresight. So I'll share 2 of them with you. One is I fail fast. The reason I fail fast is I can't afford to fail slow. Secondly, I can learn faster when I'm failing faster. So I have metrics for that. I teach you how to do that in the book. Another thing that has helped me tremendously is I take my biggest problems and I skip them. And frankly, the whole problem skipping concept that I share in the book is, I think, worth the whole book in itself, because it is so powerful in giving you the ability to do things faster, to accelerate your success, to skip barriers that are in your way. And because most of us try to plow through them. rather than skip them altogether.
Yeah, certainly there are some companies, and we can, we've already talked about some of them, but, I'm based here in Ottawa, and Shopify is one of the ones that, it comes to mind because, I certainly started my mobile app startup around the same time that, they started their thing, and, they're a public company now, worth over $1 billion. I mean, they figured out how to do that, and it just, if you were to try to plan ahead and predict without the scientific approach that you take, there's no way you would have thought that would have been possible. And they just took
exactly
leaps and bounds.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you noticed, but in my book, Flash Foresight, towards the end of the book, I've got a thing called the experiment. And basically what I did is when I was writing Flash Foresight, we were in a recession, global recession, when I started writing it. And I thought, why not take the principles of the book, apply them to starting a company with no employees and no money, and see how good the book is. So I did that. And it was amazing what happened. I remember while I was writing the book, I gave about 70 speeches around the world that year. I also was consulting with a lot of big companies. I wrote over 100 articles during that time, as well as writing my book. And so it wasn't like I had a lot of spare time. Yet without employees and without any money backing, I was able to create a company that grew very quickly. What I did was I created the first national real estate apps. There were no real estate apps before me. I used the hard trend methodology to come up with 100 apps that would exist. If they didn't exist, they would exist. I just had to decide which ones I wanted to do. So I had, apps in there on how to find your lost dog. I had apps in there on remote disease monitoring and remote diagnostics of diseases, using smartphones, et cetera, et cetera. And so I had over 100 of them. So I decided real estate would be a way to go because I did a Google search and saw that the most searched word back at that time frame was the word foreclosures because there were so many foreclosed homes. So what I did was I created 3 apps, and I did 3 because they all worked the same. They just, therefore, it really was like one, but it was a threefer, meaning I created one called Complete Homes, which are all the homes that were for sale, another one called Complete Foreclosures, which were all the foreclosed homes that were for sale, and a third one were called Complete Rentals, which were all the rental homes for sale. And I had a part-time student working on the side who did the programming because I didn't do the programming, and gave him McDonald's wages to do that because it wasn't that hard. And within 6 months, when I launched the apps, those 3 apps, we were the 17th most downloaded app within the first day, and we were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and New York Times and other major publications within 2 days. I was on national television by the second week. And most people at that time were selling apps for 99 cents. And I didn't like that model because once you got paid, you had to support the app, but you weren't getting any more money. And I like recurring revenue. So I was the first guy to come up with the idea of recurring revenue for apps. So what I did is I made all 3 apps free. And what I did was I charged real estate agents $24.95 a month for an exclusive zip code in the app. So if you were in New York and you wanted the New York zip code, that cost $24.95 a month, and you would be the only person for anyone who would search for an apartment or for a home or a foreclosure in that place. Well, when all the U.S. zip codes were gone, and it didn't take long because the first real estate agent that saw it got 20 zip codes, the next one bought 50 zip codes. When all the zip codes were gone, and it didn't take long, I was bringing in $1.7 million a month in recurring revenue. And yet all the apps were free. So my point is, was I able to create a startup on the side? By the way, it was very on the side because I was a very busy guy. And at the same time, with no employees and no money, and with low risk, and make sure that it would do well. The answer is, yeah, hey, I showed it right there. I did it. And it was getting so big that I ended up licensing the software, as I mentioned, to Zillow and those other guys so that I could collect royalty streams, because now it was going to start making me too busy.
That's fascinating, because I'm actually in the process of moving from Ottawa to LA or south of LA, Huntington Beach, that area, and I'm using Zillow constantly, so pretty fascinating. Hey, one of the things that I'd love to do, and you know, as soon as I finished reading your book, I thought it'd be really fun to kind of do this, and maybe a good way to kind of wrap up the podcast is some future predictions, and some of which you've done already, but in a few different areas, and it's transportation is one of the ones that I've been thinking a lot about. I have 3 teenage daughters. You know, we're sort of a little on the edge of the city, a little bit in the country, and it's just a constant headache. And I thought, well, it's pretty obvious. I mean, sometimes they'll take Uber, but we really need something like Uber Pool, where people can sort of share a ride. And then ultimately I thought, well, you know, public transportation needs to go that way. So I was going to ask you if I thought, you know, am I crazy to think that way? And then something popped into my Facebook stream about that being launched in Singapore. So let's push transportation a little farther out. You know, where do you think that's going? That's not obvious.
Yeah. Well, first of all, what they're calling the sharing economy is real, and the fact that, you know, there's at some point when you have the mega cities getting bigger and bigger and traffic getting crazier and crazier, if we continue to build and everybody wanting a new car every year or every other year or every third year, you know, our cities end up getting so crowded, and look at what's happened already. So we are going to see the sharing economy. And by the way, we're not just talking about cars. We could be talking about RVs. We could be talking about boats. We could be talking about motorcycles. It's far bigger than most people have thought already. And there's plenty of room for opportunity, as you can start to see just by me mentioning those things. And then, of course, we have a lot of people talking about autonomous cars. And if we would listen to the news, we would think, and even read some of the predictions by futurists that don't really understand hard trends versus soft, they would have us all thinking that we're going to be in driverless cars, you know, by 2020, and that's how all the cars will be, which would be a very foolish prediction because they're not using the principles that I'm teaching. So let's give you what the real prediction is about autonomous cars. First of all, just to help give you a little sense of it, can you imagine Porsche selling a car without a steering wheel? And the answer is, I don't think so. I don't think BMW is going to do quite well either. So here's what I'm getting at. I like to drive. I think you like to drive. What don't we like? What we don't like is accidents. So what we're doing is making the cars self-aware. We're making the cars able to make decisions based on what's going on around them to eliminate the accidents. As a matter of fact, we know that 80% of accidents are caused because of blind spots. So we can, in a short period of time, eliminate the blind spot, and not only that, but eliminate your ability to hit the car that's in your blind spot. Because right now, some of the new cars will vibrate, or they'll send a little message letting you know that if you're about to change lanes, you're going to hit a car. But let's face it, people are still stupid. They go and do it anyway. So the next level of car is going to be, it will not let you hit the car. And it'll say, whoops, can't do that. You're about to hit that car. And what are you going to say? No, I want to hit the car. Go ahead. No, see, you're not going to do that. So we are eliminating the accidents. Now, let's just think about hospitals. I was talking to a CEO of 50 hospitals. So the CEO of 50 hospital chain. And I explained to him over the next 5 years, we're eliminating 80% of the accidents. Is that going to have an impact on your emergency room? And he said, well, yeah. Have you? And then I asked him, are you planning for that? And he said, well, no. And I said, should you be? And he said, yes. My point is, the future is more visible than you think. We just need to take the time to think about it. So let me give
if you look at,
all
go ahead, yeah.
Oh, make your comment. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna. I mean, hospitals is one, insurance is the other one. That's that's probably even bigger as an economy from an accident point of view.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you ask yourself, how are we going to get those kind of sensors put on the older vehicles? Is the government going to pay for it? The answer is no, government's not going to pay for it. Ask yourself what industry will benefit from eliminating 80% of the accidents? And the answer is insurance. They're ready to write the check. And what would happen to your rates if you have an older car and you don't want to put those sensors on there? Guess what? Your rates are going to go up. See, the future isn't that hard to predict. So let me make all of your podcasts, because we're getting towards the end and I've got to go on to something else here. Let me give them an offer. And that is, if you want, you could get on Burrus.com, you could get my insider newsletter, my Strategic Insights newsletter. You can sign up for that. I think you'd really like it. You could also get a, let's call it a sample subscription to my Technotrends newsletter. I think you'd really like that. Take a look at those. I think it's a way of getting more predictions. And one other thing that you wanted to ask about, but we are kind of short on time, every year since 1983, I've published a list of technology-driven trends that will get more so and exponential. So I've got a list of 25 that you can get on my website. You can just go there. It won't take long to find it. And you can download it as a PDF and get a lot of opportunity from that. So there's something that we'll just give all of your podcast listeners.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate that. I have been receiving the newsletter, so it's absolutely fantastic. And I will link up to all of those different places on your website. Make sure that it's very easy for people to get. I mean, I think what you've come up with here is so incredibly powerful and so underutilized. I mean, if you can see something that nobody else is seeing, there's money, there's opportunity, there's changing the world, all of the good things that we like to do as entrepreneurs. So I want to thank you for pulling all of that together in this great book on your website. And also want to encourage folks to take a look at the anticipatory organization concepts that you have and some of the services, because I think it could just completely transform businesses.
All right. Well, thank you, and good luck with your podcast. And remember, for all of our listeners out there, you need to actively shape your future, because if you don't, someone else will do it for you.
Perfect way to wrap up. Thank you very much, Daniel.
You got it. Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Well, there you go, folks. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Daniel Burrus. As was pretty obvious during a conversation, I'm a really big fan of the way that he approaches business in a methodical, systematic, scientific way. Obviously, he's proven that it's very effective through his own companies, but also all the companies that he helps. I really recommend checking out his book, Flash Foresight. It's really one of the better books that I've ever seen in terms of really capitalizing on all of the things that you can know now that might be invisible to everybody else, that you can then use to come up with the product, services, and really shape the future. Thank you very much, folks, and we'll talk to you guys again soon. Bye-bye.